Rome didn't celebrate victory quietly. When a general returned from war, the city transformed into a stage. Temples smoked with incense, banners hung from stone balconies, and crowds packed the streets hours before sunrise. People weren't just there to honor a commander. They were there to watch a message get delivered. A Roman triumph wasn't only about the battlefield. It was about control. About proving to the world that Rome didn't simply defeat armies, it rewrote bloodlines. At the front of the procession came the trophies: shields, weapons, gold, statues ripped from palaces. Then came the captured nobles. The defeated king, if he was still alive, was made to walk where everyone could see him. And sometimes, behind him, came the ones Rome knew would hurt more than his broken crown ever could. His daughters. Not soldiers. Not strategists. Yet Rome understood something cold and precise. To destroy a dynasty, you didn't only kill the ruler. You dismantled what the ruler represented. You turned his family into proof that resistance ends in humiliation. The girls were dressed so the crowd would stare, either in their foreign royal clothing to make them look strange, or in borrowed Roman garments to erase who they were. Their names were mispronounced, shortened, turned into jokes. People pointed like they were looking at exotic animals brought home from the edge of the world. Some in the crowd cheered. Some pitied them. Most simply watched, hungry for spectacle. That's what made it worse. Because in that moment, their lives didn't belong to them anymore. They belonged to the story Rome wanted to tell, a story where victory was permanent, and the defeated weren't allowed a clean ending. Death ends suffering. Rome preferred something else, letting you live long enough to understand you had been remade into a warning. After the parade ended and the streets emptied, the real punishment began. People imagine captivity as chains and locked doors. Sometimes it was. But Rome's most effective prison didn't always need iron. It needed paperwork, tradition, and the quiet authority of "this is how it's done." A princess taken from a defeated kingdom could be placed in a noble household. The word sounded gentle: placed, housed, protected. But it meant this: you are alive, and therefore useful. Rome used captive royalty like political tools. If the conquered region showed signs of rebellion, the threat was never spoken directly, but everyone understood it: the hostages would pay first. If loyalists tried to raise the old banner, they'd be reminded that the old royal family now lived under Roman roofs, watched by Roman eyes. And the princess herself learned quickly that survival came with conditions. Her language was treated like a disease, something to be corrected. Her customs were labeled barbaric. Her gods were mocked, her stories dismissed. Even her grief had to be carefully measured. Too much sadness could be taken as defiance. Too much calm could be taken as plotting. The cruelest part wasn't the loss of luxury. It was the loss of self. Rome had a talent for turning identity into something negotiable. They didn't always kill you. They erased you slowly, piece by piece, until the person you used to be became a memory you weren't allowed to speak out loud. And then, when the time was right, Rome would make the next move. Not execution. Marriage. Not romance. Transaction. A defeated king's daughter wasn't just a captive. She was a claim. A symbol. A future that could be redirected into Roman hands. And once your future becomes somebody else's strategy, you start to understand the title's promise. Some fates don't end. They continue, under new ownership. Rome loved calling it an alliance. A senator would speak about stability. A household would talk about honor. Someone would mention a new beginning, as if the past could be folded away like a cloak and stored in a chest. But the princess knew the truth the moment the decision was announced. This was not a wedding. It was a transfer. A conquered royal daughter could be married into a Roman family to neutralize her bloodline. The logic was simple and brutal: if your lineage becomes Roman property, it stops being a threat. Your children would be raised with Roman names, Roman loyalties, Roman education. One generation later, the conquered kingdom's royal future would belong to the very empire that burned its walls. And if she resisted? Resistance was expensive. Not only for her, but for anyone she still loved. Captivity makes courage feel selfish, because the consequences spread outward like fire. Sometimes the Roman man she was assigned to wasn't violent. Sometimes he was polite, even proud of his foreign bride. That didn't change the foundation of the arrangement: she was not asked. She was assigned. Even when the household treated her well, the rules stayed invisible but firm. Where she could go. Who she could speak to. What letters were allowed. Which memories were appropriate to share. She became a living symbol kept in a beautiful cage. And the city watched. Because Rome enjoyed seeing conquered royalty civilized. The gossip traveled fast, how she dressed now, how her accent softened, how she learned Roman manners. People called it progress. But it wasn't progress. It was a slow conquest of the mind. The princess could survive, many did. Some even gained influence. But influence is not the same thing as freedom, especially when your entire life began as someone else's victory trophy. Rome didn't always need to spill blood. Sometimes it simply redirected it. Death is final. Rome's cruelty often wasn't. When Rome executed an enemy, it created a martyr. A clean story. A clear ending that people could mourn and remember. That kind of ending can inspire revenge. Rome preferred endings that didn't inspire anyone. A living captive sends a different message: your resistance won't be honored, and your suffering won't even be dramatic. It will be administrative. Social. Slow. You will become a lesson delivered over decades. For the princesses of defeated kings, worse than death wasn't one single act. It was the system. It was waking up every day in a house that wasn't yours, surrounded by people who spoke your language like it was a joke. It was being praised only when you became less like yourself. It was realizing your childhood name was now unsafe to say. It was seeing your homeland described as a place that deserved to fall. It was knowing that if you cried too loudly, you'd be accused of manipulating sympathy, because even your emotions were treated like politics. And then there was the deepest cut of all. Time. Rome had time. Rome could wait. A princess could be kept alive long enough to watch her past turn into rumor, her family line become decoration, and her identity dissolve into Roman society. She could become proof that Rome's way was inevitable. In the end, the tragedy wasn't only that Rome defeated her father. It was that Rome tried to defeat the very idea that she ever belonged to anything else. That is why ancient power can feel so frightening when you look closely. Because the worst violence isn't always the moment the blade falls. Sometimes it's what happens when the blade doesn't fall, when you're forced to live inside someone else's victory, day after day, until even your memories start asking permission. A palace can feel like safety, until you realize you never chose to enter it. After the triumph and the public humiliation, many captured princesses were moved into Roman households. From the outside, it looked almost merciful: clean rooms, fine fabric, food on the table, servants to help with daily life. People in the city might even whisper, "At least she's being treated well." But Rome didn't need to bruise a body to control a life. The real fear was constant observation. A servant who poured water could also report every word. A tutor who helped with Latin could also test loyalty. A friendly guest at dinner could be listening for the wrong name, the wrong memory, the wrong prayer. So the princess learned a new skill: silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of calculation. She measured her face. She practiced calm. She hid grief because grief could be interpreted as defiance. She hid pride because pride could be punished. Even kindness could be twisted. If she spoke warmly about her homeland, they would say she was clinging to rebellion. In private, she tried to keep pieces of herself alive. A melody from childhood, hummed too softly for anyone to notice. A proverb repeated in her mother tongue under her breath. The shape of her real name traced in her mind like a secret prayer. Tiny rebellions, small enough to survive. But even memory became dangerous. Because Rome had another weapon: rewriting the past. In Roman conversations, her people were described as wild, ungrateful, born to be ruled. Her father was reduced to a foolish enemy who challenged destiny. The more often she heard it, the more she feared something worse than punishment. She feared forgetting. And then, when she had finally learned how to live inside the cage, how to breathe without making noise, Rome often made its final move. Not execution. Marriage. A legal paper that could erase a kingdom more cleanly than any sword. They presented it like an honor. A Roman official would speak about stability. A noble household would talk about a new beginning. Someone would even mention peace, as if peace could be created by taking a girl who had lost everything and handing her to a stranger. But the princess understood what it truly was: a transfer of ownership. Rome used marriage to control bloodlines. A defeated king's daughter carried a dangerous thing inside her: legitimacy. A name that could become a rallying cry. A family claim that could inspire rebellion. So Rome didn't always cut the claim off with death. It absorbed it. If she married into a Roman family, her children could be raised Roman. Her language would become a private shame, if it survived at all. Her homeland would become a story she was discouraged from telling. And slowly, the defeated dynasty would disappear. Not in a dramatic massacre, but in paperwork and tradition. Some husbands were cruel. Others were polite. A few might even be genuinely gentle. It didn't change the foundation. She was not asked. If she resisted, she risked consequences that didn't stop with her. Rome was skilled at making refusal feel selfish. They didn't have to say it out loud. The princess could already imagine who would pay if she made herself difficult. And then came the hardest part. If she had children, those children became the battlefield. She would watch them learn Roman history first, where Rome is always the hero. She would watch them speak Latin more easily than her mother tongue. She would watch her own past become something they didn't fully understand. That is how Rome won after the war ended. Not by killing the princess. By ensuring that even if she lived, her dynasty would not. Not every captive princess vanished quietly. Some discovered that survival could be a kind of resistance, if you refused to let Rome erase everything inside you. But it required a dangerous balance: stay alive without becoming fully absorbed. Their resistance was rarely loud. Loud resistance got you punished. Loud resistance got other people punished. So they fought in smaller ways. A princess might keep her true name alive by whispering it at night, as if speaking it could stop it from dying. She might teach her child one word from her homeland each week, just enough to plant a seed. She might hide an heirloom, not for its value, but because it proved her past was real. Others became experts in Roman society. They learned how power moved through dinner tables and favors. They learned which women controlled households, which men controlled courts, and which rumors could ruin careers. A captive who understood the system could sometimes build a shield made of influence. But influence came with pain. Because to gain space, she often had to perform gratitude to the people who benefited from her family's defeat. She had to smile in rooms where her tragedy was treated like an interesting political story. She had to hear her homeland mocked and decide, every time, whether speaking up would help or destroy her. And there was always the private fear that adaptation would become forgetting. Rome's genius was making the cage feel normal over time. The more years passed, the less people remembered she was a captive. She became just another noblewoman, and that social acceptance could be its own kind of burial. Some princesses managed to survive while keeping a hidden core intact. Others didn't break in one moment. They faded slowly, until even they couldn't remember the exact sound of the life they lost. People think the worst story ends with a death scene. But Rome often chose a quieter ending, because quiet endings don't create martyrs. Execution gives a defeated people something clean to mourn. A heroic tragedy. A symbol. Rome didn't always want symbols. It wanted silence. A living captive princess was a moving message: we didn't just beat your armies. We took your future. She could be displayed when convenient and ignored when not. She could be reshaped over time until her existence no longer threatened the empire. And for her, the cruelty wasn't a single event. It was the repetition. The daily awareness that her life continued under someone else's ownership. The knowledge that her choices were never truly hers. The pain of watching her identity become negotiable, something Rome could adjust based on politics. Death ends suffering with certainty. But captivity stretches suffering into years, then decades, until the mind starts to bargain: if I become what they want, maybe the pain will stop. That bargain is where Rome's cruelty lived. Because even if the princess survived, she might survive as someone else, a version of herself shaped to fit an empire that destroyed her original world. And that is why, to many who lived it, it felt worse than death. Not because life is always cruel, but because Rome could take a life, keep it breathing, and still destroy everything that made it belong to the person living it.